Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. Today we are attempting something that sounds pretty much impossible on paper. We're taking the massive, centuries-old heavyweight fight between atheism and theism, and we are putting it on a stopwatch.
A stopwatch, really?
We're talking rapid-fire logic. We're talking about proofs for the existence of God that are designed to be delivered in under 60 seconds. Can you prove a necessary being exists using just the concept of Google?
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Is the question, who created God, actually a logical fallacy? And how does a bowl of Turkish rice pudding disprove the idea of infinite possibilities?
It definitely sounds like we have our hands full today.
We really do. We are analyzing a fascinating piece of source material, a transcript from a Q&A session featuring Ali Dawa on the channel Towards Eternity.
Right, it's set up almost like a gauntlet.
It is. He's taking on what they call the toughest atheism questions, and the catch is he's trying to dismantle them with pure logic, often in these, very short bursts.
It's a very distinct format. What stood out to me immediately about the source is the toolkit he's using. He isn't starting with the Bible says this or the Quran says that.
Right, yeah.
He's leaning heavily into philosophical logic, causality, and some specific historical anomalies. So whether you're a believer, a skeptic, or just someone who likes a good mental puzzle, the goal of this deep dive is to unpack the structures of these arguments.
Yes.
We want to see how he constructs that bridge from pure logic to specific faith.
Exactly. We aren't here to pick a winner or tell you what to believe. We're here to look at the blueprints of the arguments themselves. So let's jump right into the first one. It starts with something we all use every day.
Google.
Google. It's a very modern analogy for what philosophers will call the cosmological argument, right?
Yeah.
Or the argument from contingency.
Yes, that's it.
So the speaker, Ali Dawa, sets the scene. He asks us to look at Google. To have Google, you need the internet. To have the internet, you need a computer or a tablet. To have that computer, you need electricity, and you need humans to have built it.
He's establishing a chain of dependency. That's the key concept here. Nothing in that list exists on its own.
It's all connected.
Google relies on the internet relies on hardware relies on power. Everything is borrowing its existence from something else.
And his point is that you can't just keep going back forever, right? You can't have an infinite regress of dependent things.
That's the claim. Think of it like a sniper waiting for an order to fire. He asks his commander for permission. The commander has to ask the general. The general has to ask the president.
Okay.
If that chain goes on forever, if everyone is always waiting for permission from the person above them, does the gun ever actually get fired?
No, because the order never originates. It just keeps getting passed back endlessly.
Precisely. That's the problem with infinite regress in this logical framework. If everything in the universe is dependent on something else to exist, you never actually get existence started.
It's like a train with infinite boxcars, but no engine.
That's a great way to put it. The boxcars can pull each other, but only if something pulls the first one. The source argues that, logically, there must be a stopping point. There has to be something at the beginning of the chain that doesn't rely on anything else.
He calls this the necessary being.
Yes, an independent, self-sufficient entity. Something that just is, without needing a cause.
But here's where it gets really interesting, and it's the question I think a lot of people would ask immediately. Why can't the universe be that thing?
Right.
Why can't we just say, the universe is the necessary being, it's always been here, and we're done?
The source actually anticipates that objection. He argues that the universe fundamentally fails the definition of necessary.
Oh, so?
Well, think about what the universe is. It's a collection of parts, atoms, energy, matter, galaxies.
It's composite.
And those parts are dependent on each other. They change, they expand, they react. The universe has needs, so to speak. It requires space, time, and laws to function. In his view, claiming the universe is the necessary being is a contradiction in terms. You're trying to apply the label of independent to something that is so clearly dependent.
So the argument is that the chain of dominoes has to start somewhere, and that starter has to be something completely unlike the dominoes. It has to be self-sufficient and outside the chain of dependency.
That's the logical foundation he lays down. And that leads directly into the next segment, because once you establish this idea of a necessary being, the skeptics usually throw out the classic rebuttal.
Oh, I know this one. If God created everything, then who created God?
The classic.
It's the ultimate playground retort, but it's also a serious philosophical question.
It is, but the source dismisses it pretty aggressively. He calls it an invalid question.
Invalid. That feels a bit like dodging the question, doesn't it?
Well, let's look at the logic he uses. It goes back to the definition we just established.
The necessary being.
Right. If God is defined as the necessary being, meaning the uncreated independent start of the chain, then asking who created the uncreated thing is a logical error.
I see. It's a contradiction in language. Like asking for a married bachelor.
Right. He compares it to asking, what does the color blue smell like? Or can you draw a square circle? The syntax works, it's a grammatical sentence, but the concepts just don't fit together.
So he's saying that if God had a creator, then God would be dependent and therefore wouldn't be God. He'd just be another link in the chain.
Exactly. The book has to stop at the self-sufficient entity. If you ask who created X, you are implicitly admitting X is dependent. Since the definition of God in this argument is the independent source, the question simply doesn't apply.
It's a misunderstanding of the term.
It reveals a misunderstanding of what the term God means in this philosophical context. Yes.
He also brings in a comparison to science here that I found really striking. He talks about dark matter.
This is a classic move to challenge the strict empiricism argument, the idea that I only believe what I can see or touch.
Right. He points out that the scientific community widely accepts the existence of dark matter. But we can't see it, we can't touch it, we can't smell it.
We barely even know what it is.
Exactly. We only know it's there because of its effects.
Its effects on gravity, yeah. How it holds galaxies together.
And the speaker's argument is about consistency.
Mm-hmm.
He asks, why is it considered rational to believe in dark matter because of its effects, but irrational to believe in God because of his effects like creation or the laws of physics?
He calls it a double standard.
He does. He's arguing that atheists often apply a stricter standard of evidence to theology than they do to theoretical physics.
That's a bold claim.
It is. He's saying that inference believing in the cause, because you see the effect, is a valid tool in both fields. If you accept the unseen in the lab because the math works, why reject the unseen in the cosmos when the logic works?
That's a heavy point. It pushes back on the idea that science and belief are totally opposite ways of thinking.
Speaking of logical traps and linguistic tricks, we have to talk about the rock.
Ah, the omnipotence paradox.
Can God create a rock so heavy that he cannot lift it? It's a classic gotcha question.
It is.
If he can't create it, he's not all-powerful. If he creates it but can't lift it, he's not all-powerful. It feels like a checkmate.
It's designed to be a checkmate. It forces a limit on God either way. But the source argues that this is another case of word salad.
Word salad.
Yeah. He compares it to asking, how many days are in a week? Yes or no?
Wait, yes or no? That doesn't make any sense. You can't answer a quantity question with a binary.
Exactly. The speaker argues that the question, can God create a rock he can't lift, creates a logical absurdity. It's asking for the existence of a square circle. It's a nonsense request.
So it's not a limit on God's power.
No. He argues that God's omnipotence covers all things that are logically possible. Doesn't mean he can do things that are essentially nonsense.
I see.
He argues that God ceasing to be powerful by creating something he can't control is as impossible as God ceasing to exist.
So just because you can string words together into a sentence doesn't mean the sentence describes a valid possibility.
Precisely. He's clearing the brush, essentially. He's trying to show that these gotcha questions aren't actually pointing out weaknesses in the concept of God. They're just linguistic errors.
So we've moved through the logical need for a creator and dodged the logical traps. But then the source pivots to something more. Psychological. He talks about intuition.
This is where he brings in the concept of fitra. In Islamic theology, this is the innate, natural disposition to believe in God.
And he cites a specific study to back this up, right? Something from Oxford.
Yes, he references work by Justin Barrett at Oxford University. The claim is that Barrett's research found that young children, even those not explicitly taught religion, have a natural inclination to attribute purpose and design to the world.
So if you see a flower, a child naturally assumes someone made that flower.
Correct. The argument is that we essentially have a default setting to believe in a creator. He's saying that atheism is something you have to be taught or something you learn later, but belief is what you're born with.
It's an appeal to our hardwiring. But then, why one God? If kids are prone to believing in supernatural power, why not Zeus and Apollo and Thor? Why not a committee of gods?
The source goes back to logic for this. He calls it the power struggle argument. He references the Quran, which argues that if there were multiple necessary beings, they would inevitably compete for power.
Like a cosmic turf war.
Or even just a disagreement. If God A wants rain and God B wants sunshine, who wins?
If God A wins, God B was overpowered.
And if God B was overpowered, or if they have to compromise, they are limited.
And if they are limited,
then they aren't independent or self-sufficient. They become dependent on each other's actions or on some higher set of rules. So logic dictates there can only be one truly ultimate independent power.
okay, so up until this point, the speaker has been building a case for what you might call deism, a single powerful creator.
Right. Aristotle might have agreed with this.
Exactly. But this is where the deep dive takes a turn. He shifts gears to argue specifically for Islam.
This is a crucial transition. It's one thing to prove a prime mover. It's another to prove a specific religious text. He does this by focusing on what he considers miraculous historical anomalies in the Quran.
And he brings up 3 specific examples. The first one is about a man named Abu Lahab. Who was he?
Abu Lahab was an uncle of the Prophet Muhammad, but he was also one of his staunchest enemies. He actively, publicly opposed the early Muslims.
And there's a prophecy about him.
Yes, in Surah Al-Masad, the Quran explicitly states that Abu Lahab and his wife would perish and enter the hellfire, essentially predicting they would die as disbelievers.
Okay, but how is that a proof? People predict things all the time. I could predict my neighbor's going to be grumpy forever.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The source argues that this prophecy was a massive strategic risk. It was revealed while Abu Lahab was still alive and active.
So Abu Lahab had the power to prove the Quran wrong.
That's the 10-second opportunity the speaker mentions. All Abu Lahab had to do was stand up in the town square and say, "Hey everyone, I convert to Islam."
Even if he was lying.
Exactly. Even if he was faking it. If he had just verbally accepted Islam, the prophecy that he would die a disbeliever would be instantly proven false.
And the whole religion would crumble because the holy book made a demonstrable mistake.
The source frames it as a game theory problem. Logic dictates Abu Lahab should have used this loophole to destroy his enemy. It was the easiest way to win.
But he didn't.
He didn't. He remained a staunch enemy until his death, fulfilling the prophecy that said he would never change.
The speaker sees this as divine confidence, knowing exactly how a specific human will behave, even when it's against their own strategic interest.
It's like a reverse psychology trap that lasted a lifetime.
That is a fascinating angle. It really makes you think about the psychology of the people involved.
Uh-huh.
Okay, let's move to the second miracle he mentions. This one is linguistic, right?
It is. About kings and pharaohs.
Yes, this is a favorite among apologists who focus on historical accuracy. The source points out a discrepancy between the Bible and the Quran regarding the rulers of Egypt.
Okay, lay it out for us.
The story of Joseph, Yusuf, and the story of Moses both take place in Egypt, but in different eras. The source claims that the Bible refers to the ruler in both stories as Pharaoh.
Which seems standard. We always think of Egyptian rulers as pharaohs. It's almost a synonym.
Right. But the speaker notes that the Quran makes a distinction. In the story of Moses, it calls the ruler Pharaoh, but in the earlier story of Joseph, it calls the ruler King, Melech.
Why the difference? Is it just a stylistic choice?
The source cites the Rosetta Stone in modern Egyptology. He argues that historically, the term pharaoh wasn't used for the rulers during the dynasty when Joseph would have lived. They were kings or Hyksos rulers. The title pharaoh came later during the New Kingdom period, which aligns with Moses.
So he's saying the Quran corrected a historical error found in the Bible.
Yes. He asks if the Quran just copied the Bible, which is a common criticism, why didn't it copy the mistake?
That's a good question.
He argues that without the Rosetta Stone, which wasn't discovered until thousands of years later, there's no way the author of the Quran could have known to make that subtle distinction unless it was divine revelation.
That is a very specific detail. It's amazing how much weight is put on a single word choice.
It shows the level of scrutiny these texts are under. He's arguing that the precision implies a source that knew the history better than the people of that time did.
Okay, let's hit the third one, the Roman victory.
This feels like a high-stakes gambling story.
It really does. This refers to Surah Ar-Rum. At the time, the Byzantine Romans had been absolutely crushed by the Persian Empire. The source says historians viewed a Roman comeback as impossible. They were on the brink of extinction.
And the Quran makes a prediction.
Yes. It states that the Romans have been defeated, but they will be victorious within 3 to 9 years.
That's bold. Putting a timestamp on a prophecy is dangerous. Someday is safe, Next Tuesday is risky.
Incredibly dangerous. If 10 years pass and nothing happens, your credibility is gone. The speaker calls it a big gamble.
So what happened?
But historically, the Romans did mount a shocking counteroffensive and defeated the Persians within that specific window.
And for the speaker, this isn't just a lucky guess.
No. For him, the combination of the unlikelihood of the event, everyone thought Rome was finished, and the specific time frame confirms that the source of the information had knowledge of the future.
So we have logic for God, psychology for monotheism, and history for Islam. But there's one last argument the source makes that I think is the most fun, mostly because it involves dessert.
The sut-lak analogy.
Yeah, Turkish rice pudding.
This comes up when he's addressing the argument of infinite possibility.
Right. The atheist argument is often, if you give the universe infinite time, eventually life will just happen by chance.
Like,
the monkeys typing Shakespeare.
exactly. Given enough time, chaos becomes order. But the speaker shuts this down with a glass of water, or rather, an empty glass.
He says, imagine an empty glass. You want to make sut-lak.
And
And he's very specific. He likes it with the burnt top.
very important detail.
He asks, if I wait infinite time, will that empty glass ever produce the pudding?
And the answer is obviously no.
Why? I thought anything was possible with infinite time.
This is the crucial distinction he's making between time and ingredients. Because the ingredients, the properties, aren't there. You don't have milk, rice, or sugar in the void.
Time is just a measure of duration. It's not a creative force.
Exactly. If the potential for pudding doesn't exist in the glass, 1 trillion years won't change that. 0 multiplied by infinity is still 0.
He applies this to the universe. He says, will we get a universe? No. Will we get a Ferrari? No.
Right. His point is that you can't get something from nothing, no matter how much time you give it. If the properties to create a universe didn't exist in the pre-universe void, then infinite time is irrelevant.
It brings us right back to the start.
You need a creator to put the ingredients in the glass.
Time is irrelevant. That's a strong closing statement. It dismantles the idea that time itself solves the problem of creation.
It forces you to deal with the mechanism of creation, not just the duration.
So what does this all mean? We've walked through a dense forest of arguments here.
We have. The source is presenting a comprehensive worldview. He believes that logic inevitably leads you to a necessary being. He believes human intuition supports that. And he believes that specific textual anomalies, like the Abu Lahab prophecy or the King-Pharaoh distinction, validate his specific faith in Islam.
And you can feel the confidence in his voice throughout the transcript. He keeps saying he's willing to debate professors, scientists, anyone.
Because for him, this isn't about blind faith. He views it as the inevitable conclusion of rationality. He believes he has the math to back it up.
It's definitely a perspective that challenges the listener to think. You don't have to agree with every premise to appreciate the structure of the argument.
Oh, absolutely.
It forces you to ask, where does my chain of dependency stop? How do I explain the intuitive belief in purpose? These are questions worth wrestling with.
Absolutely. And examining the why behind what we believe is always a valuable exercise.
And that leads me to a final thought I want to leave with you, the listener. It goes back to that Abu Lahab story.
The man who wouldn't fake it.
Exactly. In a world where we talk so much about probability and chance, how often do we see historical figures who seem to play to a script written for them years in advance? Abu Lahab could have served his own best interest by lying. He could have destroyed the very thing he hated just by saying a few words. But he didn't. He played his part perfectly to the bitter end. Was that stubbornness? Was it chance? Or was the script really written before he ever stepped on stage?
That is something to think about.
Thanks for listening to Thinking Deeper by 6-7.